Today I'm going to explain the differences between 3 different types of flours that I have and why it's important to use the flour that the recipe calls for. So my first flour that I have is going to be my cake flour. Now this cake flour is going to be made up of soft wheat flour, and I'll have a protein content between 6 and 8%, which this will be the lowest protein content you'll see out of any of the flours. It also happens to be bleached, and what that does is it makes gluten form faster when you're processing this, and also weakens the protein in your flour. But this makes it great for cookies, great for cakes, obviously like the name says, or anything that you want to have a tender and delicate texture. And if you feel the grains of your flour, they're going to be very fine compared to the rest of the flours. The next flour that I have with me is my all-purpose flour. And so this all-purpose flour is going to be a mix of hard and soft wheat flour, and I have a protein content between 10 and 12%. This is also bleached and also enriched. And what enriched means is that they're adding specific nutrients back into the flour to replace the ones lost during harvesting, milling, and bleaching. This gives it a finer texture and it increases its shelf life. So if you feel the grains of this flour compared to your cake flour, they're going to be a little coarse, more coarse than flour one, but barely enough that you can't really feel it. But like the name says, all-purpose flour. Has a long shelf life, great for people that don't want to have 3 different types of flours, especially if you live in a college kitchen and you don't have that much room. So great for cookies, great for bread. Just an overall great flour, but if you're a chef, if you want to make cakes, you're going to use a cake flour. If you want to make bread, you're going to use a bread flour. So moving on to my last flour, I have my unbleached bread flour. Being unbleached, my proteins, or my gluten's already going to be more strong. And then this is going to be out of hard wheat flour, and it's going to have a protein content between 10 and 14, oh goodness gracious, 12 and 14% protein. It'll have a high gluten content to help the bread rise and give it shape and structure. Like the name says, great for breads. You wouldn't want to use this for making cupcakes or anything unless you want to have a really tough textured cupcake. And if you feel the grains on this flour, it's going to be very coarse compared to the rest of the other 2. So my experiment that I wanted to do, I wanted to test the different flours in the same bread recipe. So I took a basic white bread recipe, put cake flour in one, put my all-purpose flour in the next, and bread flour in the last one. And what I wanted to see was how the flours affected the size and the texture of the bread. And to ensure that there was consistency and no human error across my bread, I threw it in the bread maker just to make sure that it had the same knead time, rise time, and bake time. But before we talk about the breads, there's a few things that are very important in consideration of bread formation. One of those is being gluten. So each of these flours are going to have a different amount of gluten in it based off the protein. And so gluten involves the formation of disulfide bonds between proteins. It is made up of gliadin and glutenin. These are found on the endosperm of wheat kernels and make up 80% of the protein found in wheat. So when you add your flour and water together under the right conditions, you're going to start to form a dough. And the gluten proteins in the flour link up end to end and form long spiral-like coils. And the coils allow the dough to become elastic and stretchy. And so when you have more protein present in your flour, it's going to make for a stronger and a lot more elastic gluten, making for a more strong and elastic dough. And that's because you're going to have more glutenin and gliadin in your flour to form gluten. So when you have less protein in your flour, it's going to make for a weaker, crumbly gluten and make for a weaker dough. And that's just because you're not going to have as much gluten in your flour to make it strong. So here are the 3 breads that I have. I think you can see them all. This is my cake flour one, this is my all-purpose flour bread, and this is my bread flour. And you can see that there is some size difference between them. The cake flour didn't rise as much as your all-purpose, and the all-purpose didn't rise as much as your bread flour, which since the bread flour has the most gluten in it, it's going to help it give rise more and give it some more structure. You can also see that there are some air pockets in here, and that it's a little stronger than your all-purpose, which you can't really feel, but this isn't as strong as this. And if you go and feel the texture of your cake flour bread, it's very spongy, very light, and very airy. So depending on what type of texture you want for your bread, you have to use the correct flour. So if you want a light and fluffy, soft bread, you can use your cake flour. But for me, I prefer nice, dense, strong texture bread. So it's very important to make sure that you use the right flour in your recipe, and also very important to know the differences between your flours. And that's it. Thank you.